Good evening and welcome to the weekly Roundup with William Hellmann. I'm your host with very little to offer other than sarcastic remarks, William Joseph Hellmann. Anyway, this is the first official episode of the podcast, but I highly suggest you check out my pilot. I did an excellent interview with my good friend from the Baltimore City Republican Central Committee, Christopher Anderson, who is also a candidate in the 2020 elections here in Baltimore. He ran for the 7th City Council District and has a lot of great insight and stories to tell from that, so I highly suggest you check it out. I actually wanted to start the show out doing a series on the city council candidates and mayoral candidates and such from 2020 here in Baltimore, because we had a great Republican running field, but that wasn't in the stars for this week. So instead, I do have an excellent guest who I'll introduce later in the program. But before we get to that, I'd like to talk about America. As a country, we have been through a lot in the month and a half since I went and first did that little pilot of my podcast. We have experienced a lot of highs and lows, ups and downs, thrills, chills, and spills. But you know what? Biden's biggest failure so far was not sitting there on the steps of Air Force One, nor was it waiting 65 days to hold a press conference, which is a record, not the one you want to make. It's at the southern border. You remember how for years we heard about the mainstream media screaming about Trump keeping kids in cages? Absolutely outrageous that he keeps kids in cages like this. Except it turned out, in the end, that was Obama. Yeah, that was an Obama administration official. We all know this by now. Now here's a new photo for you. It's much more recent. This has been taken after Trump left office. Now Trump, he kept children in clean, foster care-like conditions when they were crossing the border unaccompanied. This is how Biden treats migrant children. And no, this isn't some photo leaked on CNN or MSNBC. There aren't angry liberal talking heads screaming about this. This was leaked by a right-wing conspiracy site, Project Veritas, who edits their videos. You know, the usual defenses. The liberals don't care. It isn't the bad orange man doing this. It's one of their own. And so they're going to ignore it. That's why today we're going to talk about the crisis at the border. But first, it's time for This Week in the News. Last Friday, Hellmann an editor for USA Today, announced on Twitter that she had been fired for blaming last Monday's mass shooting incident in Colorado on angry white men. When it came to light, the shooter was a Syrian immigrant named Al-Aliwi Alisa. Many critics took to social media to call out the race and inclusion editor for herself being blatantly racist. Now, Deadspin editor Julie DeCaro, who authored the original tweet Jeh responded to with her racist rant, tried to defend the now unemployed editor, saying, "Outlets want diverse voices, then get upset when those voices draw the ire of the very well-organized right-wing outrage machine." That's a pretty paranoid statement there, Julie. I would seek professional help if I were you, but I personally think it's about time, though, that we get these left-wing racists out of media and put them into the trash bin of history where they belong. In much sadder news, a suicide attack has left dozens of churchgoers injured after two suicide bombers attacked the Sacred Heart of Jesus Cathedral in the Indonesian city of Makassar. The congregation was inside the church during the time of the bombing, celebrating a Palm Sunday Mass. Now, while it's common knowledge most bombings targeting churches are motivated by Islamic extremism in Indonesia, a country where, say, 87% of the country believe in Islam, Indonesian President Joko Widodo downplayed the religious motivations behind the attack by saying, "Terrorism is a crime against humanity and has nothing to do with any religion." Well, Joe Coco, those are some pretty words, but the fact remains your country has a problem with Catholic churches, the religious minority in your country, being bombed by Muslim extremists who represent the religious majority in your country. It seems like religion, it's playing a really big part in these attacks. And those pretty words would sound a lot more sincere if you were doing something more to stop the religious minorities in your country from becoming victims. In other news, this week the battle between the House Democrat majority and the Republican minority over the 2nd Congressional District in Iowa heated up. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi flip-flopped earlier this month after initially seating Representative Marionette Miller Meeks, who won Iowa's 2nd district seat by only 6 votes, by saying that she now was open to overturning the results of the race, even after she seated this candidate and after her election had been settled by a bipartisan commission in Iowa. Now the NRCC is running ads attacking Iowa's last Democrat Rep Cindy Axne, for supporting this attack on democracy. Democrats, including Meek's opponent for the 2nd District, have tried to validate their efforts to overturn the election by claiming 22 ballots were not counted. However, critics have been quick to point out that those ballots were invalid under Iowa election law, and that Meek's opponent, Rita Hart, not only did she not try to go and remedy this within the Iowa courts, she instead immediately pleaded with House Democrat leadership to use obscure House rules to overturn the race, so she completely circumvented the courts. Critics were also quick to point out the hypocrisy of Speaker Pelosi, who has attacked Republican members of Congress for challenging the results of some of the 2020 races in states where there were proven irregularities. Anyway, don't burn your Nikes just yet, everyone. Turns out the Satan sneakers that we have been disgusted by all weekend, well, they were not produced by Nike. Not exactly. Nike's currently suing Lil Nas's promoter, MSCHF, for trademark infringement, false designation of origin, trademark dilution, and common law trademark infringement. A double whammy of trademark infringements there. Turns out that Lil Nas and his promoters led the public to believe Nike was involved with the production of the Satan sneakers when, in reality, MSCHF had bought and customized a bunch of Nike Air Max 97s with the satanic imagery and alleged blood without Nike's knowledge. MSCHF defended its actions in an email saying, and I quote, "It's totally legal in the sense that because we're not doing knockoffs, because we're buying shoes and doing our own art and selling them for more, it's like 1000% legal, which is why thee can't do anything about it." In response to this incoherent statement, Nike sued Baltimore City schools as it was apparent the people employed at MSCHF were educated there, given the reputation for that school system for passing students who hadn't received education in math or English. Now finally, our last bit. Last Thursday, Joe Biden held his first in-person press conference, a record 65 days after his inauguration. He's a big president now. And it was as big a disaster as you could expect it to be. Among the softball questions by mainstream media sycophants, more of Biden's incoherent babbling, and a really embarrassing moment where Biden said he missed President Trump, it is clear, even amid Biden's best showing for the press, that he is in mental decline. But nothing made this more apparent than a photograph taken by a White House press photographer showing a cheat sheet on Joe Biden's podium. Right there. You can see the picture. The sheet in question had pictures of reporters and their names, some of which were circled and numbered, and a few squares blacked out. Breitbart News' Charlie Spearing noticed that Biden called on all those reporters whose names were circled and numbered. The upshot here, America, is that while we may not have a president who is mentally fit to hold office, at least we know we have one who can color by number in his little coloring books. And that's been This Week in the News. And now I would like to introduce my guest today. We recorded our interview yesterday afternoon. He is the co-host of the Silk and Joe show on Main Street Radio Network, guest host of the Alan Nathan show, which is also on Main Street Radio Network. I would like to introduce, in this pre-recorded interview, my good friend, Joseph Patterson. Please enjoy. Good afternoon, Joe. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Will?
Doing great. Had a little bit of a hiccup here earlier. So before we begin our main topic today, Joe, let's talk a bit about your show, Silk or Joe.
Appreciate the plug there. So the show has actually been around for almost 8 years now. At first, it was called Jane with exclamation point and in all caps, and then it became Silk and Antrim when she brought on a co-host. The host being Jane Silk, the president of our company, the Main Street Radio Network. But then Kathleen Antrim, she had to bow out. So I was brought in as the new co-host and also often just the only host because Jane Silk, our company president, really has a lot on her plate in that role, as you might
I
imagine.
assume so, yeah.
So, and I'm not exactly green to all this either. Back in November, I started guest hosting for both her show and the Alan Nathan show, which is actually our bigger program. Silk or Joe, that's just going to run for an hour on Saturdays. Alan Nathan show, two
Yeah, I've
hours
been a
every
guest on
weekday.
Alan Nathan before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe you'll be a guest again. Well, not maybe. You will. We'll
My
get you back
pleasure.
on.
And it's
Probably have you on
always my
Silk or Joe.
pleasure. You guys do great interviews. Wonder if
Thank
I can
you.
get syndicated. Oh, anyway, that's fantastic though that you have your own show. And for my viewers, you can catch Silk or Joe as well as the Alan Nathan show on the Main Street Radio Network. The link to their website is in this video's description. But now on today's main topic, which is the crisis at the border. So, Joe, as a radio host, you're talking to a lot of different people, a lot of different guests that you are booking. And my question is how would you characterize their perception of the situation at the border right now?
Failure. The Biden administration's policy has just absolutely failed. In addition to, as Biden's own DHS Secretary Mayorkas said the other day, having more immigrants coming to the border than in the past 20 years, we also have the housing of those people as they're coming in is just absolutely been botched because they like to blame the Trump administration, but the problem is the Trump administration's policy was working. It was keeping people out. We didn't need all those facilities, so they could close them down and save
And you
money.
actually have a clip of that you sent me of them actually blaming
Yeah.
the Trump administration. Let's play that real quick.
He halted part of Title 42 to allow unaccompanied minors to stay in the U.S. during the pandemic. He ended the provision that asylum seekers must remain in Mexico while their cases are being heard. And he suspended the safe third country agreements to share asylum seekers with other countries. You put out this statement on Tuesday. We are on pace to encounter more individuals on the southwest border than we have in the last 20 years. Mr. Secretary, do you not see a connection between the surge at the border and the policy changes that Joe Biden has made in his first 2 months?
Chris, I do not. What I am seeing is the result, and what we are seeing is the result of President Trump's dismantlement of the safe and orderly immigration processes that were built over many, many years by presidents of both parties.
Wow. So, much like Obama's financial recession, which he caused by dismantling a bunch of Bush era things that were actually propping the economy up, they're now blaming their border crisis on the previous Republican president.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Chris Wallace at the beginning of that clip, this was from Fox News Sunday about a week ago. I guess that would be March 21st. Wallace outlined everything that Biden was doing to basically open up the border and just send the message, hey guys, come on up, which Biden himself actually sent a year ago when he was doing the presidential debates and
And
said he
honestly,
hopes.
that's impressive. Clearly, Chris Wallace finally unglued his mouth from Biden's butt cheeks.
Yeah, he's kind of, I guess, center left, but even his sensibilities seem to be taken away by what the Biden administration is doing. And the Biden administration too, they would have known that all this would happen. Democrats like to say they're smarter than us. Jimmy Kimmel, he said he made that famous line a while ago. Why are late night comedians always liberals? It's because they have to be smart. Well, hey, smart guys, guess what? Your policies caused all this to happen, and you should have known it would happen because you should have been seeing that the Trump administration was dismantling some of these border holding areas because they didn't need them anymore because the Trump policy was keeping people off the border.
Literally was, I mean, these are the smart people who say 2 plus 2 equals 5 because math is racist and sheet
Yeah,
music's racist,
actually, the
because
state
they're
of Oregon,
smart. They're smart people.
the state of Oregon Department of Education actually did rule that blacks are incapable of understanding that 2 plus 2 will always be 5. So a lot of that is routed in the racism of white liberals. That's another topic. Actually, maybe it is kind of similar to this topic. Maybe that's why they don't really care what's happening to the people they're forcing to come up to the border.
Pretty much. And honestly, for my African American viewers here, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Oregon Department of Education's comments there. Moving on, though, what level of outrage are people feeling especially after seeing the leaked photos of the Biden migrant facilities that
Oh
are
no, the
literally
press seems.
keeping children in cages? With these little
Mhm,
silver blankets, and they were leaked by Project Veritas, not the
mhm.
media. The
Yeah, the
people
media
who
wants to
edit
keep it
stuff.
quiet,
Yeah,
and they're not going to be disseminating these images to a widespread audience. It's only conservatives who are looking at Project Veritas. And I think Twitter even suspended Veritas for a little bit or deleted their tweets for showing some of these pictures at the border. I
well,
believe they were eventually restored though after it was proven that
that's just a weekly
this is a bad thing.
occurrence.
Point is though, cover up
It,
by the media, by tech giants, all of them. They don't want you to know that their vaunted glorious leader, God King Biden, has been causing this huge humanitarian crisis at the border.
yeah,
And even some Democrats, though, are breaking with the narrative, like Congressman Henry Cuellar out of Texas, Congressman Ro Khanna out of California. They'd be the first to tell you there's a crisis at the border. Now,
doesn't
the
change the
solution might.
fact that the situation itself might even be breaking international law in terms of
Mm,
humanitarian things. But do you
yeah.
think the outrage is more directed towards the media and politicians who spent the last 3 years pretending to be outraged over Trump keeping children in cages when in fact they were actually kept in pretty nice conditions, like almost like foster homes? Or are they are they angry over the hypocrisy, or are they just plain angry that you've got children here huddled together during a pandemic with nothing but these little, foil blankets, not getting showers for weeks on end, not eating for days on end? What do you think the main source of outrage over this is?
All right, I'm going to say that given how even if you believe the election was stolen in 2020, the most ardent warriors against about that still say like 70 million people voted for Biden. So I'm going to say, based on that low estimate of America's intelligence, that most people forgot entirely about the kids in cages under Trump, or just think that that's somehow separate. And I'm going to say that the outrage is just at the humanitarian conditions. And I would not be surprised if that 70 million even believe that it's Trump's fault somehow.
And that's somehow a very optimistic outlook, too, that it is altruistic and that it is about the humanitarian conditions. I know I'm I am equal parts outraged by both. I would like to see these children treated better. I would like to
Mhm.
see them, I would
Well,
like to see them housed better, but I'm also extremely angry because it's a total double standard.
and I saw something earlier today when researching for this. Gateway Pundit reported this. The nonprofits that the Biden administration well, actually, it started in the Obama years. They set up this program for nonprofits helping out kids at the border, and the Biden administration continued that. Well, 19 and they got $9.7 billion to work with here. 99.9% of that money is not going to the kids. It was like 407,000 kids that were being helped by it. Each of those kids was getting $23,000. So that only added up to about 9.7 million. Where's the rest of the 9.7 billion going?
Well, I mean, Bernie Sanders probably needs a fourth house.
Yeah, wouldn't be surprised. AOC, she needs help paying for rent in DC like she did when she first moved there. And Kamala Harris, who can't find housing right now for some reason, she need help too.
Yeah, it's amazing how they can't find housing with huge vice presidential and congressional paychecks. Actually, Kamala Harris is supposed to live in the vice president's mansion. I'm pretty sure they keep a separate mansion
Yeah,
assigned for the
that's
vice
not
president.
ready yet or something, so she's had to live elsewhere at the moment, and she was complaining about that the
And
other
is
day.
she trying to defumigate the Pence out of it?
Yeah,
The
maybe she wasn't a
competent
big fan
vice
of Pence.
presidential vibes.
Yeah, I mean, she was one of the most ardent opponents of the Trump administration, calling them all white supremacists. She said ICE was like the Ku Klux Klan. So you can imagine she would not want the Pence stench to be over the vice president's residence.
Yeah. So, judging by the pictures and stories we are seeing coming from the border, and this has been a secondary concern, well, not so much a secondary, but it's a concern. Do you think, though, that this border crisis is going to contribute to a new wave of COVID infections here in the United States, and specifically in Texas, which has been doing better? They were able to lift their mask mandate. Nothing bad has happened yet, but, then again, you've got Washington, D.C. releasing COVID positive migrants into their communities. So, do you think this is going to lead to another wave of COVID?
I'm wondering if that isn't part of the point of this, honestly. The politicians like Dr. Fauci, who nobody ever heard of until last year,
I didn't.
and suddenly he's Mr. Popular, and he's talking with the Chinese about how we all need to have these COVID regimens in place, the lockdowns and all that for years to come. Um, so people like him, they definitely would want these populations to be spreading COVID. They definitely would want the open borders to bring COVID in because once we start licking it, they're going to start losing excuses for taking power over us.
Right.
So now, whether that's just you know byproduct of the thing and a happy coincidence for them or the intent, who knows? They do. But definitely, there are going to be more rises in COVID cases because also you got to figure, even if we're all vaccinated, like Dr. Fauci loves to say, we're not vaccinated against every strain of COVID. So these guys could be bringing in stuff the vaccines aren't designed to handle. Now that might just mean that even with the vaccine, you might just get like a less bad case of COVID from these new strains, but it could also mean that they don't work at all, like sometimes happens with the flu.
God, yeah. I mean, this would also be a great time for the little Animaniacs thing where they do the singing. Because you're talking about all these different strains and stuff, so you must imagine there must be one for every state capital, country.
Oh yeah, they got the UK strain. I think that was the latest one, and it's okay to call it the UK strain, by the way, but you can't call it the Wuhan
Wuhan
virus.
yeah, which I have been calling it. So, do you think this crisis is going to hurt the Democrats in the midterms next year? Of course, provided they don't actually succeed in passing their election fraud bill that allows them to commit fraud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be for you listeners, HR1 and S1. I guess viewers. I'm used to listeners on radio. Anyway,
It's going to be for both.
this, all things being equal, this would hurt them in the midterms if they haven't, figured out how to solve this crisis or at least bear it by then. Because voters have a very short memory.
It's true. Well, I guess another question then too is: do you know, or have you personally spoken to anybody who lives near the border or works for ICE or the Customs and Border Protection Agency, and have they retold any stories you feel like sharing?
I have not spoken to them. No, we had a guest on a while ago for the Alan Nathan show. I booked the guy. They live in Texas, I think, along the border, near the border. Had seen some stuff. They talked with Alan about it. Fortunately, I don't have that right in front of me, but it's just encouraging you all to go listen to every edition of the show until you find it. So
There's nothing wrong with that.
yeah, me forgetting it is only beneficial to my cause here of promoting the show. But aside from that, though, I have been reading stories about people along the border who have seen definite increases in cartel activity, shootouts, and people being smuggled across their property. And of course, the Biden administration wants nothing to do with any of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they'd actually have to stop these new voters coming in for them.
Yeah. And you would think, though, that the residents in those areas would have a case for the government deliberately endangering their lives, but no one's brought that to court yet.
It's interesting you bring that up because I did have a conversation with a family member recently where I told her that, the way to handle this, the Biden administration is not going to handle this, but Greg Abbott, has a good constitutional case to sue the Biden administration because they have a constitutional duty to uphold the law, including immigration laws, so he can sue them for failing to do that. And under that pretext, he also should be deploying the Texas National Guard to the border and stop, they should be stopping all incoming migrants, illegal or legal, because, you've got, again, DHS is busing COVID positive migrants into the country. knowing that they're going to A, spread the virus, and B, bail out without going to any sort of immigration hearing. So, I'm not just saying stop them from coming illegally across the border, stop the customs and the CBP buses, stop all of it. I mean, I don't mean to gaslight the CBP, but they're right now going and dealing with orders from somebody who's very incompetent and has an agenda.
Yeah, my take on that, I guess, would be that, we're sitting here, you, I, and any of the viewers who are American citizens, we're locked down, we can hardly go to the store, and they're talking about COVID passports so that we can't travel unless we can prove we've been vaccinated. Well, none of these people coming across, legal or otherwise, with COVID, have any such restraints on them. They have more rights to travel than we do, and we actually live in this country.
That's right. Really quickly, though, that music means we're about to move on to the game segment of the show here. So we're going to play a little game called Political 20 Questions. It's like regular 20 questions, and I sent you the sheet on this already. It's like regular 20 questions, but we're going to guess, the name of a politician, a bill, or something in the news right now that has to do with politics. So it's the same rules, it's just a very different approach to it. So anyway, I'm going to mute your audio and video real quick while I show the viewers what today's word that you'll be guessing is.
Oh, you don't trust me to cover my eyes and close my ears?
Yeah. So the word of the day today is migrant kids in cages. Kind of fits with the theme of the show, a little crass, but here we go. All right, Joe, so we got you back on now. And we're going to switch over to your view here. Bear with me. All right, so are you ready?
Yep.
Let's start. Ask your first question.
All right. This is very, not me self-serving, but you self-serving this question here. Is it something covered in your book? And why don't you tell the listeners about your book, too?
No, it isn't covered in my book, Big Fat Liars, 9 Core Lies of Left-Wing Establishment. But thank you for the plug, Joe.
All right, not covered in the book. Was it something that happened in the last 21 years?
Yes.
Okay, I guess another question, is it an event?
Yes.
It's an event. That's 3 questions so far, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see now.
You're up to 3.
Does it... Well, of course it's political, duh. Did the Democrats do it?
Yes.
Okay. Does it have to do with the economy?
In a way, yes.
Oh, in a way.
We're up to 5 questions. You're 25% there.
All right. Did it happen in the last 10 years?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I ruled that one out. Was it election related? Presidential election related?
That's hard to say, but I'm going to say no, it's not directly related to the presidential election.
Okay. Was it related to any other election, like midterms? No,
not really.
Okay. So it's not the election of a candidate is what I was trying to rule out there. All righty. Were the Republicans involved in this at all? Getting it passed anyway?
Not really, no. No, they were not involved in this.
Did it have to do with COVID?
Yes.
Was it something to the tune of several $1 trillion?
No.
Okay.
I had to think about that, but no, not directly to the tune of several $1 trillion. We've got 45 seconds left.
Did it involve restricting our travel?
No.
Oh, okay. So economic effect, sort of related to COVID, not the lockdowns themselves, or but the Democrats did it all, whatever it was.
Yep.
Did it happen this year?
Yes.
You're darn. I mean, I guess technically the COVID relief bill wasn't related to COVID, so we could really be that one anyway.
Got 5 seconds.
Darn. Yeah.
Do you want to take a shot in the dark here?
I'm out of it.
It was related to our subject today. The phrase I was trying to get you to guess was migrant kids in cages. In a way, it is related to the economy. It is something Democrats have solely done on their own. Anyway, it was great having you on today, Joe, and you're my first victim of that game.
Okay. What, everybody else got it in time?
Oh, no. Last time we did dictators or Democrats on the
okay.
pilot. You know, we like to mix this up. Next time I'll get you with dictators or Democrats, because there
Fair
will
enough.
be a next time. So
I'm just going to say all Democrats.
There's not a lot of difference in the long run. So thanks a lot, Joe, for coming on. Again, for those of you who want to see Joe's show, Silk or Joe, look in the Mainstream Radio Network. And also check out the Alan Nathan Show. It's a great show. And if you live in Western Maryland, you can catch the Alan Nathan Show on what channel?
WZSK AM. I believe that's 1040 the frequency.
1040
1 p.m. weekdays.
WZSK on weekdays. Okay. 1 p.m. weekdays. That's great. Well, thanks for coming in, Joe.
No problem.
Bye.
Thank you.
As always, it's great having good friends like Joseph. Despite our levity and our laughing, though, this crisis at the border is no game. It's a serious humanitarian crisis, a situation where Joe Biden, under his administration, we might be violating international law. It's horrendous. Children not eating for days. Children not being allowed to shower for weeks at a time. At least a week at a time. In normal circumstances, with our own children, we take them out of situations like that if their parents are doing that to them. And yet our own government is doing this to migrant children on the border. And instead of outrage at something that's actually happening, there's silence. Silence from the media. Silence from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Silence from the many social justice activists who acted outrage over a made-up story that Donald Trump mistreated migrant children, when he indeed protected many of them who had been smuggled to this country by human traffickers. But when an actual travesty like this happens, silence. And why? Because it's not Bad Orange Man who disagrees with me. It's their buddy Joe. Joe Biden, the man they voted for. See, whether you believe Biden won legitimately or not, the fact remains. 70-some million voters in this country actually voted for this man, knowing who he was, or not. Maybe some of them don't know about his history. Maybe some of them don't know how he stood alongside segregationists and said, I don't want schools integrated. I don't want my children to go into a racial jungle. Maybe some of them don't know how he signed and co-sponsored the 1994 criminal justice reform bill that targeted African Americans. I know for a fact some people didn't know about how during the election last year he said, if black people don't vote for him, they're no longer black. But this is something else entirely. This is a travesty, and we as a nation need to fix it. However, I've run out of time for the day. Hopefully the next week we'll see an improvement. Until then, I'll see you next week, and hopefully next week we will have one of the Baltimore 2020 Republican candidates to chime in on another current event. Our city's full of them right now. We have school scandals. We have our city council president under indictment. There is a lot to unpackage and unload, Baltimore and America. So until next week, stay healthy, stay safe, and good night.